My name is Nancy Charraga. I'm a small business owner here in the Mission District. I own a store called Casa Bonampak. It's not necessarily a handmade product from Latin America or Mexico, but it definitely touches on, I think that as being Latino in the U.S., by default, it's a political stance. Therefore, the store obviously has a very political lean to it. So they can be Donald Trump piñatas, and it can also be a blending of Bay Area culture mixed with Latino culture. So it can be a fusion. Some products can be that blending of like traditional but in a modern cut. Like, for example, in the clothing, they can be very indigenous clothing. The store is more than just a store. We're actually a small company that contains several departments, which is the retail store. I have an online store. I have a wholesale department. We have an educational department, which includes like the classes and the workshops.
Personally, I think it's been a benefit to me, and it's only been something good in my eyes. It's something that makes me different, for lack of a better way. You know, but I don't think that self-education would be the way of killing it, so to say. I think it's a great foundation and a great level to be, this is who I am, this is my identity, this is what I find myself being a part of. But at the same time, I'm also afraid of people who become too much of that, right? You could securitize something that you think is a good subject that shouldn't be talked about, but at the same time, if you don't have an open dialogue about it, I think you run into a very slippery slope, and you find that you're not seeing the full picture of what your identity means to the community around you.
The whole reason for having my store is so that people can get connected to culture. Where are they going to have connection when they lack a certain education about where they come from?
I remember growing up, I was, as many people would say, I was too white for the brown kids and too brown for the white kids. Without even knowing what the meaning was, my profile name was Beaner Pride 1024. But that's just coming from a place of I'm hearing this word, describing myself, thinking that this is what it is, not understanding that it's a derogatory term. And then you start putting these puzzles together and see, okay, well, this person was actually putting you into a space or into a box that doesn't necessarily define you.
My role as an educator, I think that if you are angry or you come up from a position of anger, like, no, that's mine, don't celebrate it. I feel that we can harness the interest, but sort of teach people without anger, because I don't feel anger is productive.
I think it's important for people to have cultural education because it just makes me think of Chimamanda Adichie. She gave a TED Talk once about the dangers of a single story, and it essentially is the idea that when you only hear one type of story about a certain kind of person, right? Like, let's say about Black people, all you hear is that they live in poverty, or about Africa specifically, her example is about Africa, all you hear is that they live in poverty, that they have no food to eat, and that's all you imagine when you think of Africa. But no, like, Africa is a very like lush, beautiful continent with like a bunch of like different varieties of people and like diversity there, you know. And there are, yes, some places in Africa that do fit those stereotypical images that you see, but there's also a lot of places in Africa that look nothing like that, you know. And I think it's important for people to have that cultural education so that they can realize that there's more to themselves and their culture, their heritage, their people than the dominant like American narrative.
You're able to express yourself in Spanish. It just taps into so much more of a tapestry and richness. It's very intertwined with culture, and so if you lose the language, you really will lose 60% of the culture, if not more. The world is so global now that it's inevitable that we're going to share and overlap traditions. So I personally feel that we can celebrate different traditions. For example, Santa Claus is not really Christian. That comes from the German tradition, or the evergreen in the Christmas tree. And so what we have is a blending, right, of Christianity with Santa Claus, with the evergreen. And I like to celebrate those traditions. I like to celebrate the evergreen. So for me, the Christmas tree has, it's what survives the winter. Those are not necessarily my traditions, but so there's a blending and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not culturally appropriating it. When I think back on the 23 years and the fact that I started my business in the back of my truck selling at flea markets and street fairs, it's just kind of amazing, that it could have transformed and turned into, it's really like a cultural octopus of cultural entrepreneurship. And the way that I have connections, not just with the mission, but with artisans that are really like my family. They've really become a part of my family.